add my words of welcome to those of the captain. Yes, it shouldn't actually say user experience, but we'll get into that in a minute. Jay and I had noticed this trend towards 30-minute presentations, so we came up with this scheme where we'd be allowed to talk for an hour on the roadmap, on the technical roadmap. What Jay hasn't quite understood, that it's also part of my cunning plan to let him be the guy who overruns into the first coffee break. Seriously though, as Gita mentioned, we're getting more ambitious. Our first priority is, of course, to service the needs of our existing customers, but we're also getting more ambitious about finding that next generation of applications and users out there. And we felt we needed to really spread the management load between more people. So the Chief Experience Officer, it's not just user experience, but sort of the experience of customers and users, stakeholders at all levels. So my role is really to go out, and which is something I've been, a large part of what I was doing already, meet with you, go outside, meet people outside the APL community, understand what they really need, and then come back to the Chief Technology Officer, who is into really implementing, how do we do that, and the details of that. Of course, Dyalog is a company that has a very flat hierarchy, so everybody dives in. We even listen to the CEO and the chief architect and all the developers. So we're still working on exactly how this will, how the division of labor will be. It's not a very firm thing. So here's a slide from last year where I was already saying same old focus areas. The roadmap doesn't change a lot from year to year, and I like to say that's a good thing. I think we have fairly clear idea now of where we're trying to go, both on the language and interface side. And although things never take, they always take more time than you expect, we're moving along, I think, in pretty much the same direction. So in essence, I'm responsible for two of those sections, and Jay is primarily responsible for the others. One way you could also say Jay is primarily responsible for the C programmers, and I'm looking after the tools and things that are more outward reaching to application development and so on. Okay, so there's the two old focus areas and the ones that have really been added that I'm supposed to be spending more of my time on, the time that I don't need to spend because Jay is taking care of the rest. So more specific focus on usability and the marketing, getting the word out. One thing which is very dear to me in terms both of the long-term interests of existing users, but also attracting that new generation, is portability. So getting APL, making Dyalog APL available on new platforms. The font size has been changed because of the resolution. It says platforms there. Ideally, just a little bit before you decide that it's critical to have your application running on that platform. So we're trying to stay a few steps ahead of you. The supported platforms, there's no changes this year. We added Mac OS, I guess that's a year and a half ago now, the Raspberry Pi a bit before that, and we are working on a new set of platforms, but not ready to announce anything yet. I think one thing we've done recently is we initially, the non-commercial educational was only available on Windows. It's now available on all the platforms except AIX, where we don't have a lot of demand for non-commercial licenses. But ask us, we can probably produce one. And I don't know what that was. It's too early in the day. I could have sworn I saw something there. Right, now a really important component of putting it's actually quite easy to port the interpreter to new platforms. But providing user interface, both for the developers and for you to provide user interfaces for the applications that you build, that's where the hard work is. And in essence, you could say that burden is what took APLX out of the market. In a sense, They built cross-platform. They built some very, very nice cross-platform GUI tools on Windows, Mac, and Linux about, 10 to 15 years ago. And they used tools that are no longer available, no longer supported. And that's something that we desperately want to avoid, falling into the same trap. I think we've been fortunate that Quad WC has lasted about 25 years. Windows was so dominant for a long period of time, but we can't expect that to continue. We must provide development environment and application development tools that will work on the other platforms. So here's a screenshot of the ride running on Windows, I think, connected to a Mac, because we can tell by the path there that that's a Mac, and this is a sneak pre-announcement of SQAPL becoming, our ODBC interface becoming available on the Mac from the next release. So the status of the ride, the current production ride was, I think, our third attempt to produce it. It was called Ride 3.0 actually in its first release. That came out with version 15. No, it came out with 14.1. The Ride 3 was released with Dyalog 15 with some major enhancements. There was a workspace explorer, so you get the graphical tree view of your workspace. And I think very significantly, the ability to launch APL processes on another machine from whichever desktop you are on. The Ride was is the primary IDE on our Mac version, which was released last year. It looks like this on the Mac. Looks actually quite a bit nicer than the Windows version. So you see the Workspace Explorer here, and a bit of the APL session here, and a function editor. You see, it's quite similar to what we now call the ODE, the old development environment. And the plan is that over the next year or two, it's going to have so much functionality that people will use it, use them interchangeably, and not feel that they're lacking any functionality. There's still a few things missing from the Ride, but it's coming along. So the plan for the next release of Ride, which will accompany version 16, although they're not directly linked, you'll be able to use 3 and 4 interchangeably with 15 and 16. We've had sort of a few usability issues that we're working on, the first wave of production users. We're going to promote it to being the primary development environment also for the Linux and Raspberry Pi versions. And perhaps most excitingly, a browser-based version. So with version 16, if we succeed in what we're working on at the moment, you'll be able to launch an APL interpreter on any platform and instruct it that it should accept RIDE connections. And then you'll be able to point a web browser at it and get the graphical IDE without first installing it on your desktop. And a few features that are missing. Also importantly, Nick and I will be talking about this tomorrow in the session titled Open Front Ends. We're documenting the protocol and open sourcing the entire ride and hoping that people will start building third-party add-ins. And in fact, we'll be demonstrating a small example of that tomorrow. Right, so that's the IDE. When it comes to the work that you do, develop applications, that's also a primary part of my focus. And our goal is no less than, we want you to be able to develop your APL application on any of the Dyalog platforms, whichever is closest to you or suits you best, or use Ride on one platform and actually have APL running on another. And then you should be able to, without making changes to your source code, deploy that application on any one of the other platforms. Of course, if you take advantage of platform-specific features like the .NET framework, we're not going to try and make that available on Raspberry Pi. But if you stick to basic, sort of the core bread and butter tools that we're planning to provide and already providing, you should be able to do that. Virtually all the recent work done by the APL Tools Group and the APL Interpreter Group are designed from the beginning to work on all the platforms. And we can actually see now there are 2 or 3 really current new projects that people are working on where we can interestingly see they've elected to do the development on Windows or Mac OS, but then the application is deployed running on Linux on Amazon Web Services or something like that. So this seems to be starting to work, and it's something we're really focusing on. So the cross-platform tools that are sort of mature, certainly been out there for quite a while. There's our TCP-based layer that Björn Christensen is responsible for, which is sort of the basic web communications layer. That is cross-platform. The My Server, which is our web framework built on top of Conga, is also something that we test on all the platforms. The ODBC interface is designed to be available on all platforms. It wasn't available in the initial release of the Mac OS product, but it will be from the next release of Dyalog APL. Our interface to R for statistics is on Windows, Linux, and the Mac. We have a little utility workspace to load data from external files in various formats. XML JSON converters. Our cryptographic library, I think, is pretty much, we found we hadn't compiled something for the Mac, but we found that out because somebody wanted it, and so we have a hole we need to fill. The graphics and publication production tool known as Sharpplot, which Nick Delcross is responsible for, works on all platforms. And the native file tools that were put into version 15 to allow you to list folders, create folders, read entire text files, or write them in one go, is also designed to be cross-platform from the start. So this really is, this is not just talk, we are putting our money there as well. And there's quite a bit to come in the next releases. New version of Conga, Björn and I will be talking about tomorrow. The ODBC interface on the Mac, as we discussed. VecDB is a new prototype project that we're working on that I'll talk about this afternoon. It's a columnar database implemented in Dyalog APL. Once people start working in these multi-platform environments, we find that we really need, this is something that many of the APL tools projects have needed, is just a general way to launch other processes, be they other APL processes or other things that you want to use, communicate with from APL. We're providing something called APL Process, which is a class that allows you to do this cross-platform. The Dyalog file server has been out for quite a while. It's in production use. We think as people have to face up to security audits and so on, there'll be a sudden rush of people moving towards the file server so that you can have properly secure component files even in a LAN environment. We haven't completed the documentation and packaging on that, but it's something we hope to do very soon. The support for JSON, I think in the next release, probably be promoted to a system function, and I'm hoping we'll also see a quad CSV, which is something Dyalog APL has really needed for many years, so you can bulk load very large volumes of data or export them. Yep, and in the slightly longer term, we can see that cryptography is a general, I don't know how many of you think you need to do something with cryptography in the next year or two? Right, so we think, we've had a cryptographic library out there for you to play with for what, Björn, 4 years? 4 years, and everybody says it's very important. Nobody's really taken a look at it, but you can see people are getting more and more worried looks on their faces, that they realize that this is something everybody's going to have to approach. In the meantime, the operating system support for cryptographic features has become much more complete. So once Björn is finished with the current round of enhancements to the TCP layer, we think he's going to take another deep dive into cryptography and try and update the cryptographic library to take advantage of the crypto features that operating systems provide, rather than us providing all the algorithms. because one of the unfortunate things about cryptography is that people don't just want you to provide it, they want you to be able to prove that you're using verified cryptographic methods. So therefore, providing the algorithms yourself doesn't quite cut it. And since the operating systems now cross-platform seem to provide much better support, we're going to see whether we can provide something better. And of course, the holy grail, the two-way data binding that's going to make my server as good as QuadWC eventually in terms of binding variables in your workspace to HTML, JavaScript, GUI. And you can use that in your own applications as well. So that's the big picture on the tools side. There's a tools group presentation later today, right, where the tools group will go into more detail on some of those. So open source, this is something which is really becoming important to us. Social media in terms of sending people messages is one thing, but I think it's really important that many of the tools that we provide are out there in an open source format, because all the young kids coming to APL from outside expect that they can read source code and so on without first installing your product, and using binary formats is really just not done. So my server is published on GitHub. We've sort of settled on GitHub as the place to do this. The VecDB work that I'm doing at the moment on the columnar database, the project is just there. All my commits just go up onto GitHub. You can follow the level of activity. Synchronization toolbox, something for handling multiple threads, based on some code which I think originated at APL Italiana, which they kindly said they were happy for people to have access to, and then Gilgamesh has taken a look, and I've taken a look, and it's all up on, the results are up on GitHub now, and so on and so forth. It's really important, I think, if we're going to make this transition to bringing in the next generation of users and making them and yourselves, the established users, productive, that we really embrace this approach and you start contributing to the folders. We are committed to doing what we can, and all the tools work that we do will be published here. But the quality and the quantity really could benefit from your help. Okay, so the elephant in the room with respect to going cross-platform and building modern applications is, of course, user interfaces. And we're celebrating 50 years of APL, 33 years of Dyalog APL, I think, and 25 years since John Daintree joined the team, and he's been working primarily, well, not entirely on user interfaces, but a lot of work on user interfaces. It's 24 years, I think, since Microsoft Windows 3.1 appeared, and within a year, I think, John had given us QuadWC. There's a Vector article about that, a review of that, which is worth reading again. And I would argue that, you know, of the features in Dyalog APL, certainly that attracted me to Dyalog originally, I think QuadWC is perhaps the main reason why so many of us are here today, that Dyalog has been a very successful product. And it's really, really important now that we come up with a successor technology that is as durable as QuadWC. And we've had quite a lot of false starts, Silverlight, WPF, and so on and so forth. But now things seem to be settling down. The big question is, or a question that comes up over and over again is, well, should you do it? Should you have a standalone approach, APL-centric solutions that any APL programmer will feel comfortable with? They can see all pieces of the stack and they can easily learn how to use it. Or should we integrate with platform-specific frameworks? So, you know, should the user interface be in APL, or should it be in C#, calling APL as an engine? Should my server run standalone, or should you use Microsoft IIS Apache and have it call APL as a DLL of some sort? Should we do our own cryptography? Should you use relational databases or a database written in APL? And you know, the big shops who have specific integration requirements, and the software engineers with skills other than APL will probably be in favor of integration. The little APL guy is going to be more in favor of the standalone tools that he completely understands and can quickly build prototypes with. And my conclusion is still, unfortunately, we need to do both of those things. We can't take an easy... It would be much easier in many ways just to go for integration, just save APL code as a .NET assembly and write your user interface in Java or whatever. Would be technically an easier route for us. But I think we then lose the new little guys in the garages who every single one of our major customers started out as one or two guys in a garage. So trying to get the next generation without this is going to be difficult. So I'm going to show you something. Now, this now may not look very impressive. So I've got a function called select, which takes a left argument of choose OS and a right argument of well, I'm not going to add to that. Never change a demo in the middle of the presentation. Also, I apologize if anybody is shocked by this. I was told after one of my CTO presentations that by a CIO from a large corporation that showing a CTO showing live code in his keynote presentation was not done. But now I'm not the CTO anymore, so. So look at that. Isn't that amazing? And with Adam's help, it's got little, you see, you maybe can't see that, how it looks a little bit modern. And what shall we pick? Mac OS. Ooh, it went orange. And pick it, and ooh, there's the result. Isn't that amazing? Now, why am I excited about this? Well, that's because the code looks like this. So, fairly classical APL function, but in there's a function called makeSelectHTML, which takes the same arguments. And that's a function that Adam wrote for me in, I don't know, about half an hour was the impression I got. It looks like this. 3/4 of the code in there is the style section where he's defining the colors and what to do when you hover over something and how it should look and so on. Of course, if you're using this in a corporation, you would have had a bunch of people in your design group write all that code already. So Adam would only have had to have a reference to the style and then write this code here, which is creating a bunch of input HTML input controls. So he just returns this HTML. And then we have a function called embedded browser, which takes that HTML and renders it in a pop-up. And the reason I'm excited by this is that by the time I do the next presentation, and hopefully by the time you get version 16, that will work on Windows, on the Mac, and on Linux, and it will look exactly the same, and your source code will be portable. And people will write little utilities that will, like select and so on. Or they'll simply run the entire MyServer framework inside this. I've tested that. It works with, changing 10 lines of code in MyServer. It can run inside this technology. Well, what is this? We're still thinking of a catchy name for it. We should almost have a prize competition for coming up with a good name. The Embedded Web Browser Engine. So it's a library that you can load from APL under Windows, Linux, and on the Mac, and maybe future platforms as well. Hopefully the Pi, though. I'm not sure how quickly we can do that. So it allows any application which can generate HTML, which could be MyServer, it could be your own framework. You could go off and get HTML from your corporate portal and inject it in here. We have at least one customer who's looking at doing that, embedding other web UI into their APL application by grabbing it somewhere and putting it there. And you can then, we've seen people demonstrate applications to do this using OCXs with embedded web browsers and so on. But this is much slicker, and it allows us to intercept absolutely all of the HTTP requests that would otherwise have been sent to a web server, including posts, WebSocket requests, and so on. So if you have a web application, something that could run in a browser, it will also run with this technology. So the sky's the limit in terms of modern UI. You could use all the Syncfusion libraries. You could use jQuery. You could use any JavaScript libraries out there to have a very modern, very responsive UI. Kai?
Can you say the name of the technology?
Oh, it's the Chromium Embedded Framework. Yeah, so it's essentially Chrome, Google Chrome, which is an open source product which has been tweaked a little bit and embedded in a DLL, and John has done some things to catch the stuff that comes back. And you know, it's early days, but I've been looking at this for several years now, and I'm still feeling that it's the successor to Quad WC, because HTML, JavaScript is going to be around for a similar amount of time, whether we like it or not. Okay. Yes, marketing. So, yeah, I mean, any more questions on that before I completely change? John?
I just want to just clarify a point.
Yeah.
The CEF framework itself has not been changed.
Right. Okay. That is an important, yeah. It's an important distinction.
Could you please echo what John said?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so what John said was that the Chromium Embedded Framework, Google's source code which they publish, which has not been changed. We haven't had to make any changes to that code. Yes, I mean, we were actually slightly worried that that we were doing something that wasn't quite right here in intercepting. You know, people might have an application that actually went off and did a query to Google Maps, and we could intercept that. And the way the API currently works is, for each request you get 2 calls. You get one which says request should be intercepted, and you look at the URL, and in my server, for example, it'll check that this is a post back to the website that you are running. And if it's not a post back to that, it says request should be intercepted 0, and then the request will go to Google Maps or whatever. You only intercept the things that are post backs to the site that you are being. Yeah. Okay, so we must move on. I promised Jay he'd be able to start early. That's not going to happen, but at least I don't want him to start late. You knew that. I love marketing. It's really fun to see, and it's really encouraging to see that when you go into these are quotes from India, Bangalore. There's a conference there called Functional Conf where we've been. I think it'll be our 3rd year now. This year, Roger and I are going to do 2 presentations and an all-day workshop in Bangalore. We won't be here on Thursday because we'll be flying to Functional Conf. And when you show APL to a bunch of people who haven't seen it before and don't have any preconceptions about it, yeah, I like that one so much that although Gita's shown it to you, and there it is again. And these little ripples are spreading. So suddenly you get, I think actually Alex Wiener had something to do with this. He got interviewed first, and then he recommended that they talk to me. But these little ripples are spreading. So suddenly you get interviewed by a podcast, and that goes up, and then another bunch of people contact you and want to interview you or talk about it. People are quite excited by APL. So this is really worth doing. Young people find APL fascinating. At least the functional and dynamic language people find it quite nice. So 2017 will be the year where we start doing webcasts. 2016 was also this year, but see the exclamation marks. We will blog, we will tweet. This is actually going quite well. We have people code golfing. Marinus, one of the winners this year, found us because he was a code golfer and he discovered APL because of his interest in code golf. So code golf is something where people compete to write the shortest expression in some programming language. So people are typically allowed to submit in any programming language that they want. We are gradually, I mean, this has been a plan for many years. It's gradually happening. We have more and more presentations outside the APL community. I did a keynote at some ACM conference called Array16, a workshop. And the Google talk, which happened also, was the result of ripples coming out of Functional Conf. I can't quite compete with Scholes, but I'm claiming that the frequency, there's a little uptick there, so I'm claiming the frequency is at least not going down. Romilly says it's noise, but and he's probably right, but I like it anyway. And in terms of this does also pose us with some challenge, because Dyalog has been, I think intentionally from Dyadics and Dyalog side, the APL system for the professional developer. And we haven't spent the time on the new users, the less sophisticated users that we should have. So here's Suki, who was an intern, visited Roger for 2 weeks this summer. Yeah. So learning APL, she's interested in math. There she is. Presumably that's APL on her laptop. So our challenge is, without reducing our commitment to the professional developers, we must focus on understanding better the needs of the new and the less sophisticated users. And the pro shops need to recruit new talent too, so they should support this activity. And we have migrants to Dyalog APL now, as Gita mentioned, who are also challenging some of our ideas about what is the good design of an APL system, coming in from APLX or APL Plus, and have other ideas. Now, you may have noticed this, those of you who, we spent, we're starting on rebranding and so on, we spent more than $100 having this, having this designed. And there it is on the desktop, and there it is in your APL session. And the APL session is also looking fresher and so on. This was a baby step in version 15. Watch this space. The standard disclaimer applies about when things will happen. But this is getting important also for the new users. So at 33, those of you who are fans of Lord of the Rings will know that hobbits come of age at 33. And I think we can say we're coming of age. We're trying to slow down a little bit, when Dyalog APL has evolved so fast in terms of adding new features over those 33 years. It's amazing. I think we're now reaching the point where we need to slow down a little bit, be a bit more careful in the selection and design of features. We need to spend much more time on explaining what's already there, making tutorials, looking at the usability of the user interface and so on. And the new users, not just domain experts, but also software engineers, because there will be some software engineers who find APL interesting as well, and we really need to keep them happy because their influence will be large. Yep. But it feels like it's all coming together, to me anyway. Oh, and performance is an important part of usability. So we need one of these slides in every roadmap presentation. So I now, to end this session, I need you to join me in a little hymn. If people ask what you're using for your development, it's Dyalog, and it's a modern, array-first, multi-paradigm programming language which supports functional, object-oriented, and imperative programming based on an APL language kernel. And then people will say things like this. But of course, that's rubbish, as Alex points out. You know, it's cool when anybody does it. So get out there and blog and tweet and GitHub and so on. And I finished almost on time. Thank you very much.